as a result of making a scratch-built number 5 turnout up in the Falls Creek creosote plant, I was able to, well, obviously I removed the number 6 Atlas turnout that I had up there, which is a left-hand turnout. And that was floating around in my workshop down here and got me to thinking. The upper staging yard that we've talked about in other videos is a full 6 tracks wide, and can, on 3 of the 6 tracks, can hold a 16-car train caboose with 2 locomotives. But the challenge I was having is the upper staging yard, the throat actually is a little further away towards the layout, I guess is the best way to put it. And as a result, so this is a longer staging yard. And what I had done previously, you can see where the gaps in the rails are. This is where the lower staging yard used to end. I had some additional space a while back, so I extended it. And in extending it, got so I could get 16-car trains, at least I think on one track. This track wasn't quite long enough because the boards I used to cobble together the extension were not full pieces, but I think I've rectified that now. So the bottom line is the lower staging track was always a little bit short, or smaller actually, and a slight bit shorter, and it has 5 tracks instead of 6, so it was 1 full track short. Now there is, way back in here, there is 1 more track, but that is actually the lead for the Bessemer. That's the lead for the Bessemer and Lake Erie staging yard. So there's 3 tracks here, 1, 2, 3, and then here's the Bessemer and Lake Erie main that runs back to the layout and parallels the Chessie main into Butler. So when I had done this, I wanted to make sure I could get past my utility sink and up into the crawl space all the way back there, in case I ever needed to fix any plumbing or do any work. And so that's why I had tapered this upper staging, or sorry, I tapered the lower staging yard to be able to clear the sink. And for whatever reason, I really don't know what I was doing. It was very early on, and maybe I just wasn't planning properly. The track isn't parallel to the tapered benchwork. So what that did up here, it left a little bit extra room. So here was the existing track. So I took that turnout from Falls Creek, dropped it in here, and started adding another track. And unfortunately, like I said, the taper of the benchwork wasn't quite parallel to the track. I'm not sure, like I said, why I did that. So what I did is I came in with 1x4 and just kind of kept on stepping it out at the appropriate spots. And here again, I don't know if you can see the center line of the track. So that'll actually get me a 6th track in the lower staging yard. So they'll be a little bit more consistent. Something else is I had a crossover here. So when I only had 1 staging yard and was really only just running 1 train into Butler, switching Butler and coming back, I was using the crossover just to let the locomotive run around the train. I'm not sure. I just don't use that anymore. What I'll use is actually the switcher from the Bessemer and Lake Erie at the end of an operating session. I'll use that switcher, come onto its lead, and then it can run down the main ladder of the Chessie yard, and it can pull strings of cars to, you know, free the locomotives, and I can just get everything reset. So I don't know if I'll put that back in or not. If I do, I'll have to move it, because it was, I think, two locomotives, approximately 2 locomotives from the end of the 1 throw bar to where the old track used to end. Now that I've added that, I need to move it about 20 or 22 inches if I reinstall it, and I haven't decided if I am. But right now the ground throws are in the way. I'd either have to shorten those, but there's really no point in leaving it where it is because it just doesn't maximize the length of the train. So I think I'm just going to take it out entirely. So that means I'll just have to come back up to here and rework some of this track. I've got some extra flex track. This is all the flex track I took out of the engine service facility as I started hand laying the Code 70 rail in there. So these are all kind of spare parts left over from, or generated from, doing the hand laying of tracks. So I figured, you know, what a great opportunity to reuse these components to balance my staging yard capacity a little. I think the upper one here that represents Rochester and Buffalo or East Salamanca, or just points north essentially off the modeled railroad, that's probably still going to be a little bit larger, but this is going to get them a lot closer. It used to be, I think, once I got my full operating session going, I'd have to start, the first train would have to leave the Pittsburgh staging yard, or else there wouldn't be a place for a southbound train to even go. Now I have a little bit more space and a little bit more operational flexibility. So that's what I've been working on here, and I think I'm just going to dispense with the crossover. The only benefit that would provide is if you wanted to actually run around a train and retool a train to send it back out in the same operating session. But you really can't do that on the lower staging yard, because the yard lead actually is the main line that would actually bring you out into the modeled portion. I suppose that would work. The upper staging yard has that grade loop, so you really could switch trains in the upper staging loop, but I don't have a crossover here. Same scenario here. I'll use, when this Clearfield branch train comes back in, its power will be at the bottom of the ramp, and then it can actually pull out onto the lead, shove back into the yard, and free you know, one of the other locomotives, and then you can over time just sort through everything and get them turned the right direction. And a lot of my trains, so as not to just, since I have access to these yards, you know, oftentimes, you know, cars will sit here for one session, so we don't have the exact same cars every time around. So actually all the cars on this track all the way in the back, which is almost full, with no locomotives, so that's probably close to 20 cars. Those are just going to sit idle in between this particular session, whereas this car is part of a train that's got the power already set up to head out. And then this track is the Erie-Lackawanna train, and then this track is the storage for Clearfield, Pennsylvania. So again, all these cars on this closest track are just going to sit here in between operating sessions. The only active cars are the ones that are actually already staged to go onto the layout on this ramp into C&M Junction. So that's, you know how it always goes. You start on one project and it creates opportunities or other projects. So that's what I think I'm going to do. I'll probably just get rid of these crossovers entirely. So I've got a little bit of track laying to do, but that'll go really quick because it's flex track. So have a little bit more progress on the F7s over at the workbench. So we'll walk over there. All right, I've got both of the shells primed, but what I'll do is just go over some of the details I've added, and I've got my glove on here just to keep my greasy mitts off the primer. So all of the fans, all 5 of them, I drilled out very carefully with a pin vise, and then just with my hand. Didn't need to use power drill. I can't find it, but floating around on my disaster of a workbench is an index drill. So I actually was able to, it's a very sharp brand new index drill, just was able to with my fingers do that, and very gently and gradually work through the shells. So those are Cannon & Company fans. Those are just the bases. There's actually, I think, 3 more pieces. There's an etched fan blade set that you actually bend each of the fan blades. Then there's a spacer. Then there's an etched metal upper grill, I guess, and then a cap. So there's 4 actually pieces for each one. So again, an Athearn blue box, you could argue, is it even worth messing around doing this? Maybe yes, maybe no. Again, I'm relatively new to fabricating or making modifications to locomotives. I've been putting decoders in for about 4 years now, and I'm getting a little bit better at that, but I just really don't feel comfortable making serious modifications to the higher quality models of today. So I've really started, or continued, working on these lower quality models. So you probably can't see it, but I have drilled a whole bunch of holes for handrails on the top. There's a spot for the horn, and this locomotive is going to be Locomotive 4569. So this one actually had, I've got photos in some of the books I have, so this one actually had silver trucks for whatever reason. So I've got the trucks painted as well. Added a brake pipe in between the two brake pistons. And on the fireman's side front truck, you probably can't see it, I did add a speedometer cable coming out of the wheel bearing. So just with phosphor bronze wire before I painted it. Also, both of these have a footboard right here. So I just took two thin pieces of styrene, welded one to the side of the frame, and then set one on top of it. So I guess you could come up that ladder, walk across the footboard, get onto the grab irons to get on the nose, which would then get you up onto the roof. And so again, that's just looking at photos. That's exactly how 4569 appeared to be in the early 70s, which is when I'm modeling. Also, I think I did mention before that these Blue Box models had two headlights. B&O, I've never seen a B&O F7 during the 60s at least that had a door headlight, so I removed those and actually cut some holes and then filled them back in to a shallow depth to allow for MU connections, because 4569 had front end MU connections through the door, and then they'll have MU cables as well. And then again, all of the Walther's detail kits, grab irons. So some of these grab irons, like the ones over the nose, those are not part of the Walther's kits, so I'll just hand bend those. And I use slightly finer wire. I think I used 0.015 instead of Walther's has 0.02. I just didn't have any more 0.02. So I think that's probably going to be it, and they have windows and so forth. So getting close to being ready to paint that one. Again, the steam equipment was all removed, sanded and puttied. As well as that front second light being removed. So the other locomotive that I'm going to model, I bought a pair of these F7s online, would be 4648. I just put that on the patch underneath the horns so that I don't forget which one's which and what I'm doing here. This is a former Bessemer and Lake Erie F7, has a winterization hatch, so while I drilled out that fan, I didn't put a Cannon Company fan in, I just covered it with a Details West, I think. I can't remember if it is Details West, but whoever sells the winterization hatches. So I welded that on, or plastic bonded that on, drilled these out the same way. So just these four fans, the dynamic brake fan, and three of the radiator fans are going to get the Cannon Company. This one looks like it has a Leslie 3 chime, and it's mounted over the engineer's side, whereas the other one, which didn't come from the Bessemer and Lake Erie, has a Nathan 5 chime over the fireman's side, but similar configuration with the grab irons going up over the nose and the footboard, and then all of the railings and grab irons everywhere else. Interestingly enough, this F7 didn't have a grab iron over the nose door, so I left that out. I added one on the other locomotive, but for whatever reason, this one doesn't have front MU equipment, so I'm going to model it as per the prototype. So this one will always have to be at the front or back of the consist that it's in. I've got a picture of it in a consist, so I know it's got rear end MU equipment, but there's no MU equipment on the front. So this one has a slightly different appearance than the other F7 that I'm doing. And this one just has either blue or black trucks. I can't tell from the photos because they're so weathered, so it may not really matter. But this one is not going to have the silver trucks. I really don't know what the story is, why that one has silver trucks, but I thought it was interesting. It's documented, so I'm going to model that one. So the two F7s are coming along. Not there yet, but I've also started making modifications to the frame. Put a piece of styrene in where the motor mounts, and then put some Kapton tape over that just so there's no chance for it to short directly to the frame. Drilled through and ground out some spots to put my ground lights, so those LEDs are glued in place with the leads cut a little shorter. Filed and tapped the coupler pockets to take a 256 screw so I can put a brand new KD coupler pocket and number 5 coupler on there. Next thing I got to do is start doing my grounding or drill and tap holes for screws so I can do a direct connection from the trucks. Also painted the side frames of the trucks and the faces of the wheels, like a rusty color or a dark grimy color, just so they don't look like they're brand new. And I totally disassembled the trucks, cleaned them up real well and then lubricated them. So we're gaining on it. I think the last thing that I did is, for whatever reason, these giant weights, which I suspect are going to make these really big really effective pullers, because these F7s are going to weigh almost a pound. These weights, for whatever reason, they slid back and forth, which probably wasn't a problem when it was a totally DC locomotive, because there was nothing there. But once I put all of the decoders and capacitors and resistors and all the other junk in here, I don't know that I want the weight to be able to slide back and forth. So I put in little blocks and super glued little blocks of styrene just to make stops. So now it moves just less than maybe a 30-second. So I think it'll be fine now. So progress nonetheless. Like I said, I've got a decoder for one of these, so it's still going to be, I think, several weeks till I get them painted, decaled, get all the interior construction done, the decoders wired, and all the lights connected. So probably going to be a few more weeks, but I desperately could use another locomotive to pull trains, so I'm going to try and keep pushing forward on this simultaneously with that track work in the lower staging yard. Alright, gone. Those two tracks and the crossover ripped out. So now just a simple matter of piecing back in all of the flex track that I've got left over. I have a whole bunch of smaller pieces sitting down there too. So get back to work and put this staging yard back into operation. And I've also got I cut a set of feeders for these two tracks, so they'll have to get restripped. I cut them at the very, very end right against the rail, so they'll certainly be long enough to come back up through the same holes and power those rails. And this new track that I've added, I might be too dark back here, but I did add in a toggle switch. So that track has insulated rail joiners, so if I want, again, that was an afterthought, something I didn't really plan on originally. I wish I had a switch for every track, but maybe on the next railroad. But this one, on the upper staging yard, I got a little bit better, so I've got one 14-gauge bus on this switch, which runs the close 3 tracks, and then the far 3 tracks. And then I've got a toggle here just for an engine storage track. So this extra track may also be an engine storage track. I still have one track down here that I can control. What I've been doing is this circuit breaker for this district, when the railroad gets turned on, it and the reversing loop, which is the ramp there for Clearfield, both of those circuit breakers, the PSX Power Shield has the option to have them either turn on when power is first introduced, be off when power is introduced, or I believe that you can actually set the CVs so that they'll return to whatever state they were left in last. But I've got this district down here and the Clearfield branch. When I turn the railroad on, they are off until you just go to the accessories and put in the appropriate accessory to turn them on. Naturally, if I ever do a full-blown op session, I'll probably turn all of them on, but when I'm usually operating by myself, if I'm not using a train from that particular area, that way they're just off and not running unnecessarily. So, all right, so put these 3 tracks back together and get some feeders connected. Okay, staging tracks have been restored and the new track extended. So now we've got 6 full tracks in the lower staging yard. Obviously I'll have to tack some kind of 1/8-inch board or something along here just to prevent disasters, and I'm so close in a couple spots I may have to leave gaps, but I think as long as the bulk of it is protected, should be fine. And I just tacked a nail in there for the end bumper for the last track, so that should really improve future operations. Really not an issue right now, but just trying to plan ahead and use some of the extra track that I had as a result of doing some of the hand laying. And still need to put feeders in, and feeders are going to be tricky where I've got solid 1x4 underneath. In Atlas Flex track, every so often there's a clear space in between underneath the rail at both ties. So I might solder on this side, pull it under the track, and then do a drill a hole through the plywood here and tie it in. Again, it's staging. I'm much more interested in it being dependable than perfectly aesthetically pleasing. So that is it for now. I will spare you the installation of the feeders. You don't really need to see that. I'm sure you know how to do that, but that'll be good. And you know, this track still, I think, will hold a 16-car train, or now will hold a 16-car train with a caboose, but it'll block this track. But again, that'll just have to be the first train that leaves, and then everything will be fine. So I think definitely glad I added that track. Not really sure why I had some weird geometry with the benchwork and the track in the beginning, but oh well, it's solved. I can still get past my sink, and we have now a much more balanced lower staging yard relative to the upper. So that's it for now. More to follow. One last shot here in the lower staging yard changes. So I got the extra track, and in the one spot where I was a little bit tight, I actually got another piece of 1x4 and spliced it in to be able to run that a little further away. So now I do have small gaps, but now I've got solid protection all the way along, so we won't have any mishaps should we have a derailment. Generally don't have derailments here because it's just straight flex track, but at least now got a little bit of insurance against a catastrophe. So I'm going to call that done here in the lower staging yard. So now we've got 6 tracks here as well, and that should help even things out with the larger upper staging yard here. Here at the workbench, continuing to make progress on the F7s. So I've got them both with 2 coats of enchantment blue. And you can see, hopefully, the Cannon & Company fan with the aluminum painted fan blades. I just have the rear radiator fan just sitting in there. It's not glued in yet. But I painted them just on a piece of blue painter's tape. The interior fan blades, and then the exterior grille got treatment of the same exterior color. And continue to make progress on the decoder install. So back here, what I've typically done is just let the Athearn contact between the top of the truck bolster and the frame serve to get continuity, and that's generally worked. And again, all of my sound locomotives have capacitors in them, so I don't really have a problem with cutting out or losing power. But just to be on the safe side, I did ground, or connect rather, the rear truck to the side. I soldered a wire to the side frame, and then that I drilled and tapped the number 256 spot in the frame, and then that's connected there. That way, if I want to remove the truck, I can. All I got to do is remove that screw. I don't have to unsolder anything. I've got the motor connected to the decoder, and I've also got my 2 ground lights, the negative side connected. You can see there the resistor. So I'm just not going to connect the positive side because the blue positive wire needs to go to both of those as well as the headlight. So I need to establish or create some type of headlight stand or something to support the headlight, because I'd prefer to have the headlight be attached to the frame. That way when the shell comes off, you don't have any wires. I'm going to do the same thing in the back. I'm going to hopefully devise some scheme by which I can support the speaker over top of the rear worm drive or gear assembly here on the rear truck. And because I've got the Cannon & Company fans, I can have the speaker facing upwards, and I think it'll still work fine. So making progress on that. And again, this is where in the front portion here the decoder will sit, and then the 4 capacitor keep alive will sit in that notch as well. So again, I need to fabricate some structures in both the rear and the front to support the headlight and the speaker. And here is the other F7 painted and ready for fans to go on. And I think at this point, it probably makes sense to do the grab irons, because that's going to be a lot of handling. And while I can wear gloves to make sure I don't put my fingerprints all over the shells, I figure if I do the decals first, then the chance of me disrupting a decal just during the handling of doing all the handrails is probably greater. So I think I'm going to do handrails next, and then once the handrails, I'm satisfied with those, then I'll do a gloss coat and add the decals. And actually, before I do that, I got to paint the yellow stripe, the bottom of just above the sill. And actually, the F7s didn't have sills. If they did, they cut them off, but I really can't do that because that's the attachment point to the frame. So I'll probably just paint below this bottom edge. I'll paint that black. But yeah, there's very little detail along the bottom. It's like a rivet strap or something. That approximately is where the yellow stripe is. So probably the next step is, once these completely cure, it's been about a week since I painted them, so I'll give them a little bit more time because I'm using Model Masters enamel and it's summer. So I'll give these a little more time to cure up entirely, just so when I pull the masking tape off or the painter's tape off, it doesn't pull my paint off, to be able to mask and paint that bottom stripe. But then I'll go to handrails and then decals. So that's the progress we've got on the F7s and the lower staging yard. I'll post what I have now and then probably do an update video in the future just to show where we are in getting these F7s on the rails. I've picked up the speakers and I've got the second decoder now, so only a little bit of time and effort standing in the way of getting these guys in operation. So that'll be a separate video. But that's it for now.